Just going back through my own life, I guess, around my Aboriginality. Growing up, my dad being the second eldest of 16 children to my grandmother who was born at Corrindurk, but having an Irish father, so there's a bit of a, I guess you could say, not so dark generation in our family, but the lighter skin colour. Dad having six kids to a German lady, my mum, I was the darkest of all of them. So when I was going to school, it was a lot harder for me to hide my Aboriginality from the racism that came my way because I was an easy target. And when I say hide it, it's something that I was trying to achieve when I was a young person through high school and primary school because I didn't know anything about it and I couldn't defend it in any way about being proud of my Aboriginality apart from all the negative comments that came my way about it. It's mainly name calling, I remember, and being made fun of. Um, the words abo and coon resonate with me quite a lot from going to school. I remember seeing my name on a drawing with a person in a Nazi uniform with a bone through their nose, which was supposed to be me because mum was German and the bone through the nose was obviously a derogatory term for Aboriginal culture. And like anyone, I guess, when you're in the teenage years, you're looking to be accepted, and one of the worst things you can feel is being segregated from your age group. And I very much felt like that. So I actually left home just turning around 17, late 16, early 17, and moved up to Wangaratta to live with two of my sisters, which that became difficult as well. So I didn't stay with them too long. But I guess that's where my independence started in myself. And I'd always liked fast cars and things like that. So I had about three jobs when I was about 18, trying to create some sort of financial stability. I'm not 100% sure. How I sort of feel about that, of what I've sort of become today, representing my people, is that my dad gave me an opportunity to learn my people's story. How it become about it wasn't something planned that I had. Um, I was sort of travelling around Northern Australia for quite a while, and I remember getting a phone call saying there's a course you get paid for to do down at Monash University in Churchill. And I said, okay, get paid to do a course. What is it? It's called Koori Studies. And so I went down there, and for the first time, I'd really engaged for the first time in my life with the Aboriginal community, and met some amazing people. A lot of them my age, but also some of the lecturers there being elders from the Gunai Kurnai people and beyond. I got a bit of an understanding of the Aboriginal community unity within the community down there. A little bit later on, Dad became the CEO of the Wurundjeri Land Council in the early to mid 90s. And Dad took on a massive responsibility as he was running the traditional owner group of Melbourne from Gippsland. We had no office or base or anything. And that was a common story for any of the elders back then who were running Wurundjeri, or as Wurundjeri was set up, because we didn't have anything. Dad petitioned the government through Aboriginal Affairs Victoria for a position called a cultural officer, as it was back then. And from my understanding, most of the traditional owner groups throughout Victoria had a cultural representative through that job. And to be straight out honest with you, my first interest was it came with a government car. So I was like, oh, here we go, a job with a free car. This will be good. Within weeks, probably a week even, I found that I had about 30 elders watching me to see whether I could do this job. And basically what this job was to research and study Wurundjeri people's history, or Wurundjeri story as I call it, our culture and history, and to to have or be incorporated in many of the discussions around Wurundjeri cultural heritage and eventually leading on to education. So they gave me a 3-month trial and I passed it. And not long after, I was put up as an elder when I say not long after, I was actually working as a cultural officer for around approximately a decade, because I was only in the early 20s when I started learning my people's story. And I guess the procedure of becoming an elder at Wurundjeri it's a little bit more corporate than it is traditional, but I got voted in at an AGM. I was 35, so that was in 2008. And I think I earned that role and respect from the older generation because of all the work I'd done prior in getting our story out there. Dad's number one. I guess I've always sort of noted with Dad personally, I won't go as far to say his generation because I don't know all the elders personally like I know Dad. But he didn't know much about his culture because of the inability of his mother and his grandmother to teach it in that generation, due to the colony not allowing that sort of cultural knowledge and practice to occur from the mission eras. Because Nan was born at the mission, and so Dad was on a learning process himself. I started to dig into some of the research, and being a cultural officer as well, what was more important to me than actually reading historical research was to actually engage with other cultural officers around Victoria and get to know other blackfellas around the place. And that's where I probably learnt more than ever reading a book. Talk about tough love. I got to know Uncle Jim Berg in the early days when he was managing the old museum, which is based at the State Library. And Uncle Jim was not someone just to share things straight off. You had to earn his respect before he started to even notice you, which I believe is a cultural way of doing things from traditional days. You had to earn that knowledge through your actions. And I've still got a great friendship with Uncle Jim Berg to this day. And outside of my own community, he would be probably the most inspirational elder I remember as a young fella. I learnt very quickly that being a senior person, I think I'm not sure what the title was, curator or the senior Aboriginal representative in the museum at that time, sharing our culture, to the public was, so in other words, education. He was a leader in education for, Victorian Aboriginal education. And then learning more about him, where he was basically one of the early pioneers engaging with institutions like the museum to get our old people back from overseas and from wherever they were held in government institutions like museums and universities and things like that. So so Uncle Jim was a real leader around culture and respecting our ancestors in probably the best way you possibly could by returning them back to country. The first thing I sort of thought of when I took this role on was I want to answer every question that's going to come my way. So I didn't want to just go there and say the same thing over and over again. I made a conscious effort into learning who I was talking to each time and trying to make the information relevant to the audience. And over time, as I got to know more, I believe I was able to connect the old ways and thoughts of how people saw themselves in the world into a modern context which people could connect to more. Everything from doing Welcome to Countries, which is an educational opportunity, all the way through to doing full cultural awareness sessions over a day. I believe that through comments and responses that I've had, that people can connect to me because I'm connecting through human nature. Because no one knows Wurundjeri culture, 100% of it. And I don't think anyone will know that past culture because of the impacts of the colonial invasion on Wurundjeri land. So the way I sort of fill in those gaps is to relate to why people do things, relating it to the cultural knowledge that I have. And I talk to people. So that human nature thing, everyone understands. And I'm really just conveying how I connect to understandings of culture. And when it comes to history, I'm trying to give the cultural perspective of what went on, not the European perspective of what went on. And I think people find that quite refreshing because you don't hear it much. You can read history books forever, but we didn't write any of it. I guess one of the first things I can think of, inspire yourself by learning about your own people's story. I could pretty much guarantee, without having all the facts in front of me, that Aboriginal people of this part of the country, if not the whole country, could look back through their family history and find some magnificent leaders that allow them to be here today. For instance, in Wurundjeri, we're lucky to know the story of William Barak and Simon Wonga and the many others who I found out how traditional leadership was actually created in the fact that they would lose their leadership role if they didn't have the respect of the community that they were leading. So all the decision making that they had as leaders was basically the voice of their community. And if the community felt that voice was being not listened to, there was actually traditional processes that removed leaders and put leaders in place that the community choice was. And that's why we're here to this day, because we had born leaders who had respect of their people in charge at the worst time in our history. So my first encouragement is to find out some of your leaders of the past and try and find the attributes of why they were and who they were and how they got us here today in a time that I hope we never ever have to go through again. Also, your own personality. Embrace that with your mob. Be yourself. The mob don't like fake people. If you're out there saying things and doing other things, they'll quickly find out. And then what that creates, if you become a leader in some form or another, you will create massive disunity. And if the community doesn't have strong leaders, we're really not going anywhere. We're all over the shop. And that unity dissipates. So it's a big challenge to take on. Try your best to create a support network around you because you're going to need them. And working together, if you have a real heart for your people, you can get a lot done because Aboriginal leadership in this community deals with some of the biggest social and political and cultural issues in the country. And so it's not an easy responsibility to take on. But with that support network and the inspiration of your ancestors, you can do it.